Ms. Colgaklis, and today we are going to be going over the engineering design process. When you first start this process, you might think, wow, this is really interesting, or you might think, man, how am I going to do this? So the first thing that I want to always teach students is to break it up into 6 different steps, okay? Memorize the first 3, and then the last 3. So ask, imagine, plan is where we are going to really get into some research. We're going to get to brainstorm and create our plan. This is our hard-working stages, okay? Then you move on to the more exciting stages like create and then improve and communicate. So today we're going to go over all 6 steps. So step 1 is ask. After your team receives the driving question, problem, or challenge, you are going to follow the steps below. The first thing you're going to do with your group is to ask at least 4 or 5 questions you may have about the driving question, problem, or challenge. After, you're going to research and find answers with your team. Use credible sources when conducting research. Remember, we're not using Wikipedia. We're using things like edu, .org, .gov, and you must write the question and the answer in your engineering design process notebook. So we are journaling this, we are labeling it the ask stage, and then underneath that, writing your questions and the answers to those questions. The reason for this is we're creating background knowledge about the topic. This is very important. You're setting a foundation for what you're going to learn next. So here's an example. Say your STEAM challenge is this. Urgent news, your town has been wiped out by a hurricane. All buildings are gone. The city planning team has hired your group of engineers to develop a new house plan that can withstand hurricane force winds, hail, and flooding. So now you guys get to create some questions first. Here are some examples of some of the questions you might have. What are hurricane force winds like? If you don't know what they're like, how can we build a house that will withstand those hurricane force winds? What materials are you going to use? What is needed to create a real version of a hurricane-proof house? What can protect a house from a hailstorm? What shape would be best when designing a hurricane-proof house? How can we prevent a home from floodwater? And then you and your group will research answers to these questions. You cannot move on to the next step until you have researched answers to these questions. So this is helping you understand a little bit about your challenge or your big problem that you guys are trying to find a solution for. So remember, 4 to 5 questions and then your research. Then you will show that to your teacher and they will approve it and say, you are ready for the next step. Your next step is the imagine stage. This is a fun stage because you get to brainstorm. I always suggest students, even in a group, split up for this part of the journaling and then come back together and share their ideas. Now, we call this, like I said, the brainstorming stage. So brainstorm at least 2 possible solutions, builds, or ideas you would like to share with your group. You will create more ideas to collaborate when you create your ideas or brainstorm your ideas separately and then come together and create 2 final possible solutions, okay? So here's kind of an example of that. You might come together, share all of your solutions and all of your brainstorming ideas, and then have a brainstorm idea 1 and then an idea 2. The next stage honestly takes the most work, okay? If you can get through this stage, you're gonna get to have a lot of fun. So with your team, you're gonna decide which one of your brainstorming ideas when, and then create a plan for it. Create a detailed sketch. What this will look like is you will draw out like the dimensions of your build. You'll label it with how big you want to create something. You'll actually put the inches or the feet, all the diameters, everything that you've learned in math to create a beautiful detailed sketch of your final product. You're going to also, underneath the sketch, do a step-by-step instructions of how you are going to reach your final build or goal. Think of, first, I will do this. Second, we will do this. Think about like when you're baking, you're following those directions. It's a very detailed plan. Say if you gave it to another group, all they had to do was read it and they would feel confident in following your plan. You're also going to list the materials that you are planning to use. So remember, in your STEAM challenges, you'll have criteria and constraints. You are going to tell me the materials that your teacher is giving you. Maybe those are your constraints. You might only be able to use 5 popsicle sticks when creating your hurricane-proof house. So with those 5 popsicle sticks, your group may choose to only use 2 of them as part of your build. And one of the very most, I would say, the most important of all of these is making sure that you delegate jobs. So you'll write the first and last names of your group members and list what they will be doing. For example, who is your team leader? Who's the designer? Who is the writer? And then after this, we move on to the next 3 steps. Remember, the first one of these is create. This is where you get to have some fun. So before you start, triple check that everyone in your group has been assigned a job. This will help your group run smoothly. Then begin to follow the plan. Create your build or solution and follow all criteria and constraints. After you finish, if it involves testing, you might test it and then collect the data. So for example, in our hurricane-proof house, we might take it through a series of tests on wind, so high-speed wind, and see if the house blows down. You might drop rocks to represent a hailstorm on the house to make sure the roof has a nice foundation, nothing's falling through. And then the flooding, we might try and see if the house can withstand some water damage, so or some water falling on it. So that is what I mean. You might collect the data. If you create maybe a rocket, you might see how far the rocket shoots in the air and collect that data. But this is the point where we would test it after we create it. And then criteria would be, okay, you guys have 20 minutes to do this. Here's the materials, and then the constraints may be the amount of something. So constraints is what kind of, think of it as a boa constrictor. It kind of stops you, it constrains you, it constricts you from doing, more than what you should. So constraints make the challenge more difficult. This is where we kind of test your will, see if you can handle being put under pressure a little bit. So your constraints usually are the amount of materials that you'll need. You're limited, and then you see who can make the best house using the materials that are given. Step 5 will be improve. Even if your design has met the goal, it's important that we always look at it and say, how can we improve on the design? Think about all of the amazing inventions around you and things that have been solutions in the past to stuff. We see that as we progress in history, things continue to improve. So again, even if your design met the goal or had a solution, always think, is there something that we could do that would improve this design? And you're going to take notes and record data after you improve it even more, or you might just say, these are some ways that we could improve moving forward. So always, 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 never, 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 I should say, skip this step, okay? Always make sure that you are pressing towards improvement. And then communicate. This is the fun part. So share out how your team designed your solution or product to inform others of your team's efforts and findings. You must note on how you plan to communicate your data to the class. This may look like creating a video of your team, reporting the process and findings / data. You could create this on Canva, Flipgrid. All of those are online websites using video. You can edit them, very easy to use. Or individually, you can write a short summary of the steps that you followed and what you did. And then the last one, as a team, create a presentation for the class. So you might go in front of the class and actually present and communicate what your team did and how successful it was. There are other ways to communicate. with each other. You might have like a peer feedback form that you fill out as you watch your fellow colleagues go up and share out or communicate what they have done. There's plenty of other ways that your teachers may come up with communicating how your PBL went or your challenge went, but this is a lot of fun to communicate what you have done. So now we have officially finished all 6 steps of the engineering design process. I'll show you guys again what those 6 steps are. Remember, breaking them down into groups of 3 always has helped me remember them. So we have our ask stage, imagine, and plan stage. This is kind of our research stage where we're doing all the background work and planning. And if you can get through those first 3 stages, you can have a lot of fun. So remember all of the criteria that you have to have and include in each step. This will be given to you guys to review several times if it helps. Remember, your teacher may make small changes or requirements. For example, in the ask stage, I just ask my technology students to list at least 4 to 5 questions. But if you're in maybe an 8th grade class or a 7th, even a 6th grade class, they might ask you to come up with more research questions in the ask stage. And as well as the brainstorming stage, I only make my students or ask my students to come up with 2 possible solutions to your build or your PBL, but you may have a teacher that wants you to come up with more than 2. So I just wanted to go over that before I move on. But I hope you guys enjoy your first PBL. I can't wait to hear about it and see it. And you guys have a wonderful year.
Hey students, it's Miss Colgaklis again. I just wanted to remind you as you go through the EDP or engineering design process, what your journals should look like. So although we want you to get messy with your journals and make sure that you write down anything and everything that you want to explore, we also want the labels for your engineering design process to be at the top of your journal. So whatever stage you're working on, say you're working on the ask stage, make sure you label it nice and big in your journal that this is the ask stage, and go ahead and underline it so that we know while we're looking through that. And some teachers might want to even highlight the stages. So when you're on the ask stage, you might highlight it with a highlighter, a yellow highlighter, to indicate that this is where I did all my research. So if I were to pick up your journal, I would be able to identify which stage you were in and maybe even write down what class you were in while you were doing those stages. So you can go back and look, oh yeah, in language arts, we did the research part and we asked these questions and we were able to collect some data there. Maybe in the imagine stage, you were in math class, so you might write imagine and then under that math and put the date. So when you go back and look at all of the different things that you've created in this class, you're able to see when you did it, where you did it, how you did it, all of that good information that's needed. Remember, we're kind of looking at this as a real world issue or problem that we're trying to fix normally. So it's really important that we take good notes and we're organized when we do this. I'm going to show you guys a couple of examples on the screen of some engineering design process journals and how people were able to do this. Hopefully this helps you guys when you're doing your own.